Well, welcome everyone, and thank you very much for joining this PRASEG webinar with Energy Networks Association. First of all, we're indebted to Bim Afolami MP for hosting us today, so thank you very much to Bim. And we've got two panels coming up, and we'll introduce the other speakers when we come to those. I'm Matt Hingle, Head of Gas for ENA. I work with Britain's gas networks on the role of decarbonised gases across the future energy system and how we deliver that transition to net zero in the interests of our customers. ENA, if you don't know us, is the industry body for the companies who run UK and Ireland's energy networks, the wires and pipes of the energy system, keeping the lights on and gas flowing for homes and businesses, even while we're all locked down. So when we consider net zero, ENA looks across the energy system as the networks facilitate new markets for generators, suppliers and users of electricity and hydrogen alike. And we look at how we can deliver safe and secure energy to everyone who uses it. We're thrilled to be partnering with PRASEG on this event, and we get a lot of questions from parliamentarians, as you'd expect, on the future role of hydrogen. What colours best? What's the impact going to be for customers? Is hydrogen safe? How do we manage the transition? And where's the UK in the global hydrogen race? We're hoping to explore and maybe even answer some of those questions with the panellists today. On green and blue hydrogen, and other colours are available, that can be a confusing part of this debate. By blue, we mean hydrogen made from natural gas with carbon capture. By green, we mean hydrogen made from water using renewably powered electrolyzers. ENA is technology agnostic, and our research suggests that there's a significant role for both blue and green hydrogen. In our 2019 decarbonisation pathways research, we envisaged the 2050 system using about 2/3 of net zero hydrogen demand from blue sources and about 1/3 from green, on the grounds of cost efficiency and the ability to scale up to 2050. As electrolyser costs come down and we connect even more renewables, electrolysers will mean the cost of green becoming even lower. British businesses like ITM Power, groups like the Conservative Environment Network, may suggest that technology can go even further and faster already. The impact for customers on hydrogen transition is pretty minimal, particularly in the home compared to the other options for heat decarbonisation. We're calling for a government mandate on all boilers sold after 2025 to be hydrogen ready. And by that, we mean that appliances would run on the gas we already use until switching over for hydrogen. That switchover might look a lot like the town gas transition we saw in the 1960s. Whole streets and neighbourhoods converted in a short space of time, with someone coming into each house to quickly and easily exchange the burner within the boiler unit. But it isn't a case of just waiting for full-scale hydrogen to be ready. There's a lot we can and should be doing in the run-up. Boilers, other household appliances can already tolerate up to 20% hydrogen. Blending now will not only begin curbing our emissions earlier, helping to meet our carbon budgets, but will also stimulate domestic hydrogen production and in the meantime, we should also continue to develop biomethane production to make more progress on reducing emissions through our gas networks. Turning to safety, in short, yes, hydrogen can be managed and delivered safely. Heavy industry is already using hydrogen in significant volumes, shipping it around the world using pipe networks like the ones that we operate for natural gas around the country. And as an industry, clearly we've been safely transporting that natural gas, highly flammable in its own right, for decades, and will apply exactly the same rigour and expertise to transporting hydrogen. As you'd expect, our research and development work puts huge emphasis on developing safe technology and procedures, and I'm sure the panellists will be covering that later too. You'll have seen around the country our members, the Gas Networks Roadworks team, out in the street with vans and huge coils of usually yellow plastic piping. That piping is replacing the iron gas mains through the aptly named Iron Mains Risk Reduction Programme, which is now over 2/3 complete and should be finished by the early 2030s. Those pipes have already prevented emissions equating to over 500,000 cars on the road, and crucially are making the network itself even safer for transporting hydrogen. On the worldwide race, well, we've seen a huge amount of activity on hydrogen across the globe in the last year or two. Countries like Australia, Japan, Germany, all making multi-billion-dollar commitments to hydrogen production and conversion. Those have grabbed a lot of headlines, but so have British businesses, including ENA's gas network members, who are right at the forefront of the trials needed, particularly on hydrogen for domestic heat. You might have seen in the news last week a significant announcement on hydrogen in heating, and a big step forward with the joint announcement between the BEIS Hy4Heat programme, Cadent and Northern Gas Networks, that 2 semi-detached houses in Gateshead will be converted to run all of their heating and cooking appliances on 100% hydrogen. That's genuinely world-leading work. And it's just one of a number of projects. The H100 project is constructing the UK's first network to carry 100% hydrogen, demonstrate hydrogen for heat in practice, delivering to 300 homes in Fife. HyDeploy is already injecting hydrogen into a natural gas network at the University of Kiel, demonstrating that 20% blend of hydrogen with natural gas is safe and can reduce emissions, and that we can manage it from a network perspective. HyNet will build on that learning to deliver hydrogen production from natural gas with CCUS, with distribution and industrial use of the hydrogen at scale in the northwest of England. All of the gas distribution networks are collaborating on H21, developing the evidence that we need on how to safely convert our existing networks to 100% hydrogen. And at the higher pressure end, Future Grid is developing the equivalent evidence for transmission projects. And we're looking at the solutions in particular areas, for example, through Project Cavendish, which is determining the viability of infrastructure from the Isle of Grain to supply decarbonised hydrogen to London and the southeast. So as a country, we're uniquely placed to make the most of this innovation, combined with our extensive world-leading gas network, our liquid gas markets, our enormous potential for hydrogen production and carbon storage, to make the most of this opportunity. The ambitions the government set out in the 10-point plan were hugely welcome, and the gas networks are ready to deliver our role in making that reality. We set out in our recent hydrogen network plan how we intend to take that forward, and we'll share details with that with everyone attending this event afterwards. But actions needed now to reap the full benefits and to lead the worldwide hydrogen economy. The export potential is vast and widely discussed, but there's also a domestic benefit for our energy consumers in being an early adopter. And the Pathways report, which I referenced earlier, estimated a £13 billion a year saving by 2050 compared to a full electrification route for British bill payers if we adopt this whole system approach with hydrogen at the centre. So to sum up for now, in answer to those questions we posed, hydrogen can be delivered safely, is affordable and convenient for customers, giving them an option for their future heating system, provides opportunities for the UK, whatever your preferred hydrogen colour scheme. And with ambitious backing now, we can lead the way for both domestic and industrial adoption, exporting our skills, our services and our products to the world. So I look forward to hearing more from the panels this morning on all of those topics. And for now, I'll hand over to Bim for some further introductory remarks.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you all for being here. I don't want to repeat what Matt has said in terms of the opportunities for hydrogen. That's presumably why you're all here and what you want to talk about. What I want to say is this. First of all, the reason why hydrogen has risen up the agenda over the last couple of years in political terms, I think is basically down to two main reasons. One is the enduring attractiveness of what you might describe as a sort of low carbon, low disruption model, i.e. it can make a big difference and change people's day-to-day lives comparatively little. So I think that is really, really important. The second is the fact that the Committee on Climate Change has identified it as a potential, indeed necessary part of decarbonisation. You know, without the latter point there, you know, I don't think we'd necessarily be in the same place as we are. However, it is not my job to say that hydrogen should be at X level of importance or Y level of importance. What we are here to try and do as PRASEG is to provide a platform so that you and people who are in the industry can get a chance to exchange, debate, and think about exactly how this is going to work for the UK. There's a hydrogen strategy turning up in the spring at some point, though I have to be honest, I'm not entirely sure where spring begins and ends at the moment, but soon. Obviously, the government's 10-point plan. The Prime Minister, I know, is genuinely interested in hydrogen. I was told by somebody in Downing Street that whenever hydrogen is mentioned, he really takes a real interest in it and wants to read something or wants to question experts on it. So I know this is something of real importance to him, and as a result, the whole government. The UK, there's a lot going on. We've got Liverpool, I think Liverpool mayoral authorities ordering a bunch of hydrogen buses. You've got hydrogen train coming on stream. There are difficulties with it, in particular, the perception, and I use that word very deliberately, the perception of safety that comes out of decades ago, but I do think that perception is very important to be dealt with as well. So if anybody has a chance, I'm sure that will come up at some point later in the discussion. So really, that's what I wanted to say, in addition to thanks for turning up. It's a pleasure to be here. We will now go into our panel discussion, our first panel discussion, and first panel discussion is going to be about making decarbonising heat work for local communities. And we all know why this matters, because unless something works for local communities, then local MPs and Parliament won't like it, and therefore it is harder for it to become adopted. So it is really important, politically with a small p, to make decarbonising heat work for local communities and indeed local people. The panel we have for this are the following. Tim Harwood, who is the project manager, H21 project manager for Northern Gas Networks. And I'm told he is in Harrogate, which is the Harpenden of the North, I've also been told, which is Harpenden is my constituency, is in my constituency. And the other person on the panel is Angela Needle, Director of Strategy for Cadent Gas, and she will explain to us how this is all going to perfectly seamlessly work in sort of completely incomprehensible, very complicated steps, as is the want of a Director of Strategy, I'm sure. I'm only joking, Angela. I'm sure you'll make a lot more sense than I do. So over to Tim Harwood on how he thinks decarbonising heat can work for local communities. Tim, over to you.
Thanks, Bim, and thanks for inviting us on today to have an opportunity to be able to speak to everybody about the hydrogen projects. So good morning, everybody. I'm Tim Harwood. I'm the H21 Project Director. And for those of you that don't know the H21 suite of projects, we task with demonstrating that we can repurpose an existing gas distribution network to run on 100% hydrogen. So we want to reuse all the pipes to save having to rebuild new infrastructure. The reason we want to do that is obviously for cost and also for disruption. So we've done a lot of social sciences, and I know Fiona Fylan's on, who works really closely with us with Leeds Becket University. So I'm not going to go into it too much. I'm sure Fiona will cover that off later on, but it is fair to say that the two main things that the public perception of a conversion to hydrogen has told us is that they don't like disruption and they don't like additional cost. So I'll just give you a little update on where we've got to with the projects that we're doing, and then I'll talk a little bit more about how we're going to sort of come out into the community in the area where we're working in Gateshead in Newcastle. So in the spring, we're going to be doing a 20% hydrogen blend trial at a village called Winlayton, which is 670 homes on the outskirts of Gateshead. It's going to be the first trial in the UK as part of the High Deploy project. There's already been a trial done at Keele University, and Angie may touch on that in a little bit. It's been quite successful, but that's on a closed-day university campus. So this is the first time we've gone out into the public domain. The trial's going to start, as I say, in April, and it'll probably run for about 10 months. So by this time next year, we will have actually concluded the trial and hopefully proved a safety case for 20% blending in the UK gas networks. And I'll come back to that in a minute, but we're also just about to start phase 2 of the H21 project. And again, that's looking at the safety case for how we can put 100% hydrogen into people's homes. We'll have finished that by the end of 2021. And again, by about this time next year, we will hopefully have proved the safety related aspects of being able to do 100% hydrogen trials, and then we'll be able to move on, if we get funding from our regulator, to be able to do live trials. Now, the point of me sort of giving you this summary really is to sort of say to you, it's a lot closer than people think. You know, when the government laid out its 10-point plan and we talk about mandating hydrogen ready appliances by 2025, you know, we've got the ability to start doing blending within potentially 12 to 18 months, live trials potentially 18 months to 2 years. We need to do these trials to prove the research that we've done as part of H21 phase 1 and phase 2, which is mostly done on sort of closed sites in scientific research away from the public domain. So we want to step out into local communities and demonstrate to them that hydrogen is something that they can accept. It's very, very low disruption. They won't really notice the difference. Even in a 100% hydrogen trial, once we've changed over all the appliances, there's very little other disruption to customers. And so I think, you know, we're on the cusp of something really fantastic here. The timescales are compressed. We'd like to be ambitious and try and push the boundaries. And I think, yeah, within 12 months' time, we'll be ready to do something really significant. And I think that's the main point now when I'm making my opening address, is that this is not something that is a long way in the future. This is now. And we really need to be ambitious and try and push the boundaries to make sure that we can take advantage of being able to put all this research and development into practice. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Before I come on to Angela, a question came in from Anne Stewart where, and I'm just paraphrasing, how can blending 20% in heating reduce carbon emissions when carbon capture and storage isn't yet sort of fully available? And so I'd like you just to answer that. In addition, how would you answer the skeptic in me that would say, I have been listening to people say that hydrogen, we were on the cusp in hydrogen for a very long time. And when you've heard that quite a lot, you therefore start to worry when someone says to you, don't worry, we are on the cusp, I promise. So could you just come across those, deal with those 2 points, the blending point, and then how do you get over the skepticism of someone like me? And there'll be others who are in this camp, which is, you know, it all looks great, but, you know, are we actually going to get there? Or in 5 years' time, are we still going to be talking about being on the cusp?
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Bim. I mean, the first one I think is fairly easy answer is that you start small. You start by fitting electrolyzers around the country, doing small amounts of blending, and then you build it up as you build up production capacity. Putting in blending through electrolysis will stimulate the market. The larger blue hydrogen projects will take a little bit longer to come online, but by then we will starting to build up networks and doing blending on a more regular basis. And so you've got to start with things that sort of leads on to the second point, really, that are tangible, that people can look and feel and touch, which is why we've built the hydrogen houses at Low Thornley, so people can come and visit and actually stay and be in a hydrogen house. And the reason we're doing the trials in closed communities at Buxton and Spade Adam on the test facilities, we want to take them out into the public domain and do trials so that people can actually see that this is something that has come to life. It is something tangible that you can look and see and touch and not just talk about. And so I think we generally are on the cusp now. Maybe people before are selling a vision, but we're selling the reality, and within 12 months' time, we will actually be able to do things in people's houses for real.
Great. Angela Needle, over to you.
Hey, I might add to that actually before I sort of say my piece, which is net zero changed quite a lot for hydrogen. So when we only had an 80% carbon reduction target, that 20% was everybody else's problem. And that's the bit that hydrogen solves. And so now we have a net zero target by 2050. You have to have hydrogen. And so between 2019 and now, all the things that made hydrogen quite hard to get over. So you need a business model that supports carbon capture and storage. You need conversion of the gas networks. You need reliable appliances that burn hydrogen. They've all been in the process of being developed. So quite a lot has happened in a very short space of time that actually makes hydrogen tangible, whereas previously it was on the cusp. So I do think, you know, there is still a lot to do, absolutely, and it's not easy because there's a big value chain here. And you know, we as gas distribution networks, myself and Tim, we just transport the energy from A to B, and our job, quite rightly, has been to ensure that we can do that safely. And the thing that we need more than anything else right now is we need some hydrogen. We need to make some for whatever use. So hydrogen's got quite a lot of potential uses: industry, transport, power generation. What do you do when the renewables are low because it's not so windy? You need a place to store energy. So hydrogen's great places for that, as well as solving the heat issue. And we know that electrification of heat is a good idea too. And somebody's made a question as well about energy efficiency of buildings. This has to be addressed. Like, you can't continue to have leaky buildings and just keep putting loads and loads of energy in. So fabric first is definitely the right approach. So, but let me tell you a little bit about what this means for regions. And just a little bit about Cadent. So Cadent deliver natural gas to 11 million homes across the UK. We manage 4 of their gas distribution networks. We've got some diversity across our patch, if you like. So we've got city centres, we've got rural England, and everything in between. So places are different, and we can't have one solution that fits everybody. And that's really important, that people recognise that there's differences. So this sort of technocratic view of, well, you live there and you're going to get this, and you live here and you're going to get that, is not going to work. So we need to think about places as we plan the energy transition. And what we've been doing in Cadent is thinking about this as a whole. So this isn't just hydrogen wins. This is, what is the right thing for that particular location? What is the right thing for those people in those buildings? What do they want for their future heating solution? It could be electric, it could be a heat pump, it could be hydrogen. And we need to ensure that choice doesn't add lots of complexity and cost, but it is realistic and deliverable. And just to give you a few examples, we've been working with Electricity North West to deliver a plan for Manchester to get to net zero. We've done something similar, in the process of doing something similar with Scottish Power Energy Networks for Liverpool. And those 2 places, even though they're nearby in the Northwest, have completely different plans to get to net zero, because they are different in the way that the infrastructure that they've got, the types of buildings that they have. There is no one size fits all. And just to give you an example of how hydrogen is important locally, in the Northwest, we're part of the consortium that's going to build HyNet. HyNet is a big hydrogen production facility, and will be responsible for building the pipeline that takes the hydrogen to nearby industrial users, blending points for hydrogen in Manchester, and other users too. So it could be blue, it is blue hydrogen project, but there's space for green in the network. The hydrogen that goes to businesses nearby, and we're talking steel manufacture, cement, bricks, ceramics, power generation, the average salary for those industries is higher than the average for that region. So this is not just about meeting net zero, this is about creating jobs and wealth locally. And also, as has been mentioned previously, we've got to make sure the network is ready to receive hydrogen. So the bits that aren't yet plastic will be replaced between now and when rollout of hydrogen happens. And so there's an investment needed in ensuring we continue the mains replacement programme. We bring more skilled engineers into that region. We not only retain the jobs for the existing gas engineers, but we turn them into hydrogen engineers too. So there's lots and lots of jobs here in the green economy. And that isn't just about hydrogen, that's just about the retrofits of buildings, the electrification of heat too, the readiness of our networks to get to net zero, and the fact that regions are different means that they need slightly different approaches. So just back to the beginning, there isn't a silver bullet. I saw it in the notes for the meeting. I hate the phrase silver bullet. To get to net zero, it's difficult across all spectrums, and we need to take people with us, which is why local views and regional plans is really important.
Thank you. Thank you. That's really interesting. I just wanted to bring in a couple of questions, and I will bring in Matt Hingle in a sec. But for you first, Angela, what do you see as the biggest, this is for Matthew Gordon, what do you see as the biggest single policy barrier to the adoption of hydrogen for transport and heating homes?
So the adoption of heating homes, so there's two things. I know you asked the one, but I think there's quite a few actually. So the thing that could help is mandating hydrogen ready boilers. So I'm sure Martyn Bridges later will mention this. So 1.6 million boilers are sold each year in this country, mostly because your boiler breaks and you need a new one and it can't be repaired. There's an opportunity to put a hydrogen ready appliance in there that can burn both methane today and hydrogen when it comes. So you've got an opportunity there to just get ahead of a transition. So that's one thing that would really help. The other thing is just making sure that the business models are in place to support hydrogen production. So as we did with wind to get it off the ground, some kind of mechanism that pays the difference between hydrogen and methane, so that those who make hydrogen have certainty of payment, if you like, for it. And it will attract a significant amount of investment. There's a lot of interest in investing in hydrogen. They just need these business models to be available, and the cash will come.
Okay, very helpful. Tim, coming to you, because a question has come in from Chris Twin, and he's asked, Tim, how is local electrolysis on the electrical grid viable? And Chris's view is that it adds demands and hence slows the decarbonising of the grid. So that is a question for you, please.
Okay, yeah, I think I can understand that point of view in certain circumstances, but there's a lot of constrained electricity that's not been released to be able to make hydrogen. I think Angie touched on it earlier. We can use hydrogen to be a battery, and you could use constrained electricity, especially during the night, from like wind power and things like that. And there's obviously the Crown Estate are looking at developing a lot more offshore wind farms. They've got to come and land in the country, and they're not just to provide electricity during the day. When everyone's asleep at night and there's low demand on the network, we can produce hydrogen all over the country by electrolysis. We can store that hydrogen either underground or in high pressure vessels for use when the gas demand picks up again the next day, or even seasonal adjustments to demand. And what you're doing there is you're using constrained electricity to actually make terawatt size batteries. And that's how you should think about it, is you're changing the energy vector from one form to another. Yeah, there are losses, but the losses are small compared with not using the electricity in the first place. So I think the overall picture about how we do balancing the energy network is using all this new wind power that's going to come on board to release energy by producing hydrogen and bringing it back into the economy when it's required. So it's a way of balancing the energy vectors across the country.
Okay, that's really, really interesting. Thank you. Matt Hingle, if you're still there. Yes, you're still there. Any thoughts you wanted to add just generally, or come in on any questions that have been asked?
Yeah, thanks, Bim. I think there's a really important sort of question discussion also taking place in the chat around vulnerable customers and how we make sure that we're taking forward heat decarbonisation in a way that that protects the most vulnerable, brings society with us, and we know that that's going to be a really important part of how we deliver decarbonisation of heat. Really, this is the area of net zero where every single household in the country is going to be affected. Whatever your view of the technologies for heat decarbonisation, it means some form of change in virtually every house. And clearly, from a political perspective, that's really important to understand in terms of the impact on voters. But it's also of vital importance that we think about vulnerability in terms of fuel poverty and in terms of other forms of vulnerability, to make sure that we're delivering solutions which do not leave vulnerable customers behind, leave them to be the last to benefit from new technologies and from low carbon heating, and protect them in terms of cost and ability to pay. So delivering energy efficiency, as Angie's already touched on, has a really important role to play there, because reducing demand is good for individual households as well as for the energy system. But we've also got to find the technology solutions which are as cost effective as possible, both in terms of the transition and longer term, for keeping people warm. And we think, as we've started to set out in this discussion and in some of the work that we've referenced, that hydrogen has a really important role to play there in meeting the scale of the challenge of heat decarbonisation across the system, and in terms of the volume of energy that we use each year, and the peaks of demand that we see through the winter. So really important that we capture that part of the discussion.
Great. Okay, I just wanted to, because there are a couple of things coming through in the Q&A in the chat that I think are actually probably easier in the next phase of the discussion around energy networks. But I just wanted to add two things before I move on. The first is that from a political perspective, you know, when Angela Needle was talking about, you know, what do people want from their energy, it's pretty clear actually. What people want is for it to be cheap and for it to be reliable. They're the two things people care about. And actually beyond that, it's sort of a minority sport as to, you know, whether it's this type or that type, or even whether it's renewable or not. It needs to be cheap and needs to be reliable. Now, cheap does not mean cheaper than it is now, or there's not a particular level. And of course, there's an argument that it can be a bit more expensive than it is today in order to pay for the things we need to do. But it needs to be perceived to be inexpensive. And I think that, so I don't think the flex for that is infinite in terms of how much more cost you can load onto the consumer, though of course it's an open question as to you know, how that ends up being paid for with time. And I'm sure that's something that will have to be wrestled with over time. And the second question, the second thing I wanted to say was that a question came in from Jeff House, and I vaguely think this is for me, but if not, well, I'll try anyway, on a mandate for 2025 for boilers. And I think the mandate point was something Angela mentioned earlier. There's a consultation later this year. My view is that mandating things, if it is technologically possible, and we've seen this, for example, with electric vehicles being a very good example, is a very good way of getting costs to come down very quickly. But you've got to judge the timing right, because if you push it too far behind, too far away, we haven't really changed anything. And if it's too close, then actually the market does not have the time to adjust and actually drive costs down. So it's a judgment call. I don't know whether 2025 is the right point or not. I don't know. What I do know is that the principle of mandating it and then forcing the market to improve the technology and the cost, I think is a very good principle. But as I say, we'll have to talk about exactly where that date is. So with that, I wanted to now just seamlessly, or not so seamlessly, move to introduce the next panelist. But by the way, these panelists aren't going anywhere quite yet. So we will, you know, there can be questions directed back to them as we go forward. These panelists that I'm about to introduce are going to talk about the role for energy networks in delivering a hydrogen economy. We're going to have Chris Train, who is the Energy Network Association Green Gas Champion, Dr. Fiona Fylan, who's a reader from Leeds Becket University, and Martyn Bridges, who's Director of Marketing and Technical Support from Worcester Bosch. The thing I will say about energy networks is, it is really hard to get politicians interested in energy networks. And the reason is because they sound really boring. However, sounding boring and being boring are not the same thing. And finding a language and stories and technologies and ways of getting people, not just politicians, getting people interested in networks, I think is going to be one of the most important things over the coming years. If you don't invest and get your energy networks right, bad things can happen to you as an individual, as a family, as a society, and as a government or as a politician. So getting our energy networks properly kitted out for what the transformation that's coming is really, really, really important. But energy networks in and of themselves do have a very dull name, which we need to work on. Chris Train, Chris, are you here?
Yes,
Chris,
I'm here.
Over to you to talk about the role for energy networks and how we all need to care about.
So I'll try and keep it brief, but I'll do that thing whilst I've got the microphone, as it were, metaphorically. I'll just make a comment on the mandation of 2025 of hydrogen ready. And I'm sure Martyn will add to this when he comes on. But the sooner we mandate, the more boilers that we change now, and the easier the transition is. We change 1.6 million boilers a year. So it doesn't take very complicated maths to work out that actually by mandating, you are driving down the cost of the creation, but you are also facilitating the implementation of the hydrogen economy. And it goes to the point that Angie and others have mentioned, that there is no silver bullet around delivering net zero by 2050. And the networks, we always take pride in being boring, because it means that we're not visible and we're doing our jobs. And the networks are well placed in terms of where we are today. I used to run the electricity transmission system when we started onshore and offshore wind, and nobody talks about the constraints that have been created in terms of getting that product to market. And the same is true, I think, for the gas. You know, we've been upgrading the network into a plastic network for the last 18 years. And as Angie says, we've got the last 20% of that to do. And it's worth remembering that 4 to 5 times as much energy goes through our networks, our gas networks at peak, than go through our electricity networks. So that, again, you don't need to know much about the physics to realize actually investing in the networks efficiently is actually going to deliver the target of net zero. And too much, the debate has been centered around either electric or hydrogen. And the reality is, in any credible scenario, we need both. And that is one of the reasons that I think it's good representing the Energy Networks Association, that actually we need to deliver the new energy system tomorrow. To use another analogy, if we decided that to decarbonise transport, we were only going to use our rail system and we were going to abandon our road system, everybody would say, well, that's a very stupid thing to do, not only because of the amount of infrastructure that you would have to invest in, but particularly you're taking away customer choice and customer liberties. So by working together and looking at the investment across the piece, we can deliver options for customers through an integrated energy system. And historically, polarising this debate has taken that choice away from customers. And we've told customers, you will need to change your behaviours, rather than we will develop the energy system that delivers your needs when you want them. So it can be, Bim, as you say, for a customer, very simple, and we can do the complexities behind the scene. And giving that choice is really important. Alongside that, I think it is universally acknowledged that the quality of our housing stock in Great Britain is not fantastic, and the more we can do over time to improve that housing stock, the better. That should be a never-ending journey, because the best energy efficiency is the energy that you don't need to use. So I think it's important that we move that debate forward. The role of the network is to facilitate that joining production. So be it blue, be it green, or any other colour of hydrogen, and delivering that through to the customer. But as a supply chain, we've worked very hard in terms of making sure that we answer all of those questions that people have, particularly around safety and around efficiency. But you need both of those together. And we are, I suppose the difference between the technologies is we are demonstrating, and we have come a long way in a short period. The world is adopting hydrogen as its decarbonisation strategy, as its net zero strategy. We have a leadership role in that at the moment, given the work that both the networks and the downstream and upstream players have put into the process. And it's important we capitalise on that. And one of the things that is hugely important, I think, is that retention of and development of jobs. We were slow in terms of offshore wind, and eventually we attracted investment into Hull through the Siemens factory. We have the opportunity to be investing in the technologies here in the UK today. And I won't steal Martyn's thunder, but the major boiler manufacturers manufacture in the UK. If we don't get onto this, then we'll be importing heat pumps from Europe. So, you know, there is a sense of urgency. The question on blending is a good question, because blending is just an opportunity of transition. Blending is a way of decarbonising our current system, but facilitating the future system of hydrogen, and how you build supply and balance the demand. So our role is to supply the infrastructure to connect production with demand and facilitate markets that will deliver choices for customers within the decarbonisation journey of achieving the net zero target by 2050. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Dr. Fiona Fylan, over to you.
Hello. So I'm really pleased that you've been speaking about the importance of the customer and the public, because that's the research that I'll be drawing upon today. So I'll be talking about two different sources of evidence. First is a series of social sciences research projects that we've been doing in collaboration with Tim and Northern Gas Networks. And that's nationwide surveys and qualitative deliberative workshops with the public to explore their perceptions and their response to a potential hydrogen conversion. So let me tell you about that to begin with. So what we found to begin with was most people in the industry assume there's going to be a bit of public resistance to hydrogen as a domestic fuel. They assume there's going to be concerns about safety. Actually, that's not at all what we found. We started off by exploring people's responses to, well, what if there were a change in your gas supply? And you know what? People have no idea what sort of gas they're currently supplied with. And they're not particularly concerned about the prospect of it changing. They just turn on the gas tap, they turn on their boiler, and it works. They're not too fussed about what it works on. So the beginning point was recognising that people don't have strong feelings about this, and they are unaware of the contribution that their gas cooking and heating makes to climate change. Well, once they are aware, there's a tremendous level of support for a potential switch to hydrogen as a domestic heating source. We did a nationwide survey looking at people's different responses to this, and we found that 20% of them, without being told much about it, strongly accept the idea that they want to use and move to hydrogen, so the acceptors. On the other extreme, we've got 12% of the people who already reject it. Now, they're interesting groups, these two, because both of them are very confident in their knowledge of climate change. The acceptors are already making changes to their lifestyle to try and reduce the carbon impact, whereas the rejectors don't accept any climate change is caused by human activity. But that means the bulk of the people in the middle don't know much about it. They're not particularly engaged in the topic. So we've been doing a lot of research to find out how to explain this to people and how to give them the information they need to make an informed choice about their future domestic energy supply. And really the key findings that have come forward are that once people know why burning methane or natural gas is a problem, they strongly support a switch to hydrogen. And their questions move from why would you be doing this to why isn't this happening already? If this is technically possible, we really should be getting ahead with this. The second key finding was that there's tremendous confidence that if this were to happen, it will be safe. Again, at the beginning of the research process, everybody's assumptions were there'd be concerns about explosions and safety and resistance to having this in their homes. That's not the case on the evidence that we've built up. People trust that the safety tests will be carried out and they don't have any concerns at all about having hydrogen in their homes. They do, some of them have concerns about unintended consequences. So could there be any long-term effects that we're not aware of? They also have concerns about the safety of carbon capture and storage. So we're going to all this effort to store the carbon. How safely is it actually stored? So that's our national research. I'm also going to draw on in the discussions today more regional research done in Yorkshire and the Humber. And this explores more about the potential in economic benefits of a hydrogen economy and having hydrogen networks. And it looked at not just hydrogen as domestic fuel, but also using hydrogen for transport. And what we found was that actually the results were so similar to the nationwide survey. 11% of people don't support this. Everybody else does. So 11% versus our 12% from the national study, remarkably similar. The people that don't support it have concerns about safety, but also, is this actually going to benefit people in the local area, or is it a case of using our region as siting industries that other areas are not prepared to have? But they're the minority. Most people strongly support a switch to a hydrogen network because it's better for the environment. So it reduces carbon emissions and it reduces air pollution as well if we're looking at hydrogen for transport. They support local industries producing and using hydrogen, and they support the idea that local and national governments should be investing in this. The key benefits are, say, for the environment, but also it's going to be a better place for us to live in. It's going to attract jobs to the area, higher paid jobs as well, which is going to provide a boost more generally to the economy. It's also going to have benefits for the supply chain as well. And also, really interesting finding, I thought, the idea that the response is that it's going to attract sustainable businesses and sustainable people to our region. So it's going to be a better place to live all round. Safety concerns, not so much in the domestic setting. For the more industrial setting, how is it going to be regulated? Are those regulations strong enough? Is hydrogen as clean as it's claimed to be? And a concern that we want, if we're going to have a hydrogen networks in our region, we want some benefits to the local area, not just big businesses setting up these networks and taking the profits elsewhere. So two separate series of studies, both very similar findings of strong support for hydrogen networks.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Just a quick question came in from Matthew Cullen on your point, and it was simply that were customers given the information about electrification of heat? So were they supportive of hydrogen when given an alternative such as that?
That's a really, really good question. It's not something that we explored in the survey, but we explored it extensively in the qualitative elements of the research. So we're bringing together members of the public and hydrogen experts to explore the topic and to bring them back a second time to get them to reflect on their experiences. And yes, people enjoy cooking on gas. People don't necessarily want a lot of disruption, so they saw the benefits of it's convenient. It's a relatively straightforward, from their perspective, conversion process. And yes, they would need to buy new gas appliances, and there were concerns about would there be any subsidies to enable them to do that. But people do, certainly the people who took part in our research, and we recruited them specifically from those people who do not have strong opinions either way, saw the real benefits of the convenience of sticking with a fuel that they feel comfortable with. And as in, you turn on the gas, you've got better control of it, rather than they don't actually know what's coming out the gas pipe anyway. So really good question. And yes, still support for hydrogen, even when people know that electrification is an option.
Thank you very much. Over to Martyn Bridges to give us your thoughts. Martyn.
Thank you. I guess I should start really with Worcester Bosch's perspective on heating technology, really. We're better known as a boiler manufacturer, gas and oil-fired boilers, the culprits probably in this discussion. But we have been selling all the other technologies, heat pumps, solar thermal, CHP units, etc. So I'd like to think we're agnostic and impartial. We don't mind what we sell, as long as it's got a Worcester brand on there. But the technology choice as we're moving forward into this zero carbon position is narrowing down to effectively two types, either a carbon-free gas boiler, i.e. hydrogen boiler, or a air-to-water or ground-to-water heat pump. And a boiler is a really hard act to follow. There are around 17 million homes with a combi boiler in them. There's about 23, 24 million homes with gas heating in. So we have 6 or 7 million with a traditional boiler with a hot water storage cylinder, but 17 million with a combi, which essentially is an instantaneous water heater and a boiler all in one unit. And they quite often fit inside your kitchen cupboard. So very small, very compact, suits the sort of properties that we have in the UK, which actually since 2010, the average floor area of a property is 76 square metres. The average for the UK is around 90 square metres. So they're very small properties. And to actually remove one boiler, which presently sits inside a kitchen cupboard, and then to replace it with an alternative, such as a heat pump, which requires an outdoor unit, an indoor hot water storage cylinder, and quite often another small buffer tank or a hydraulic unit, is imposing quite a lot on a homeowner's space constraints. So much of what I've heard over the last 5 years about heat pumps and the technology, the alternative, shall we say, then, to a gas boiler, are not really taken from the consumer end. So it was interesting to hear just some of the research done on consumer behaviour. We have tried to do this in the past. We've sold heat pumps into boiler replacement situations with various levels of success. I'm a big fan of heat pumps. I like them a lot. They have a great place and position, but that isn't always, in fact, it's rarely in some of the smaller properties that we have to experience in the UK. It is quite an imposition to actually take up now some floor area of a landing or of a bedroom to house a cylinder, which is as tall as I am and probably wider than I am, in a sort of 2 or 3 bedroom Coronation Street type property. A boiler, as I say, very compact, very tight, very small, does all that without you having to lose any space. And it can inherit the existing heating system very well. So the radiators and pipework sizes originally made for that heating system were based upon temperatures that a boiler would create. Well, a hydrogen boiler will create exactly the same temperatures. So that pipework and those radiators and sometimes the controls are very suitable for this straight swap from one gas-fired boiler to a hydrogen one. And we've had a few remarks about hydrogen ready as well. That is a really easy decision, I would have thought. It's very much a no regrets decision. When we developed our hydrogen boiler, we started in 2015. We actually fired the first one in 2017 in December at a test house in Cheltenham. We didn't even have hydrogen storage facilities at our own premises. And we've now honed it and tuned it, and it's been on various trials. And the site mentioned by the first presenter at Northern Gas Networks in Northumberland. One of our boilers is in there, and I know one of the delegates on the call, Jeff House, his company's boiler, is in one of the other houses there. That was our remit. We wanted to design a boiler which would fit into the space, into the footprint of a current gas-fired boiler. And both companies have managed to achieve this. And hydrogen ready as well. There were thoughts, well, let's design a hydrogen boiler. So we did. But of course, you would have a few issues there if you descended upon a town. Let's say Leeds was the first desktop study town floated as a potential. So if we went into Leeds 1 year and replaced all of the boilers, which I think is around 60,000 boilers, we'd be throwing away, in some instances, some very young 2-3-year-old boilers, and obviously some very old ones. But we equip the entire city of Leeds with a brand new boiler, and then render the sort of local heating engineer economy to nothing, because they literally have little or no work to do for the next 12 to 15 years other than service boilers. So there were some dynamics in there which changed our original way of thinking. So the hydrogen ready concept was the most sensible and suitable. So these are boilers, for people who may not be aware. They cost much the same as a current natural gas boiler, a little more, maybe 5%, 10% more, yet to be worked out when we get it at scale, but certainly not a lot more. You can connect them into an existing home, onto the current gas supply, and they will run all of their life. If hydrogen never comes along, it wouldn't matter. This boiler can quite capably run on natural gas for the next 15 to 20 years without any issues at all. So why wouldn't you do it, you think? Because when hydrogen gas does come along, a small handful of components, 3 components in our case, is all what's needed to convert this natural gas firing hydrogen ready boiler to run on 100% hydrogen. So it's an hour of an engineer's time, 3 small inexpensive components, and now we've got a hydrogen zero carbon running boiler. And there's no carbon monoxide, no carbon dioxide. The NOx is very low. That was a nice added bonus. We weren't expecting that initially, but the nitrous oxide emissions are half that of a natural gas boiler. So it seems an easy decision really to have this mandated, placed onto the market. So we are now equipping homes at a rate of 1.6, sometimes 1.7 million a year with a hydrogen ready appliance. Chris mentioned that we started a pipework replacement program some 18 years ago. I think it's due to finish in around 10 years' time. So the government would also have a grid, and I believe it's 136,000 miles in zigzagging all over the country, which can now ferry hydrogen quite safely. So they'd have the grid for nothing. They'd be equipping homes at a rate of 1.7 million a year with a hydrogen ready appliance. It's the production and creation facilities which are needed. So it's it's still not cheap, but it's relatively inexpensive to put this in place rather than the electrification route and the disruption that sometimes the electrification route requires. We do accept in new build, in large renovations, heat pumps will be great. You have no space constraints. You design the house ready for this extra equipment. You design the radiators and the pipework sizes, the underfloor heating, etc. All could be designed and sized for the lower temperatures a heat pump runs at without any issues. But to actually put that into an existing property, as I said earlier, and a number of times, it is quite an issue. Also, I think we've overlooked the consumer behaviour when it comes to the purchase of a boiler. And we believe that around 75% of the time, a consumer only purchases a new boiler because their old one has failed. It's broken irreparably. The parts are no longer available, or it's leaking water or something like that. And by and large, they want a new boiler as soon as they can. If it's in the depths of winter, next day or that week at least. To do anything other, you're inconveniencing them significantly. There's no water, there's no heating. And to make the remedial changes you need in the property to fit anything other than another, either natural gas or hydrogen gas boiler, is quite, again, quite disruptive. You can't do without heating and water. Do you wait till the house has had its insulation refurbishments and new radiators, new pipework, etc.? Or can you just go ahead and fit a new replacement boiler? I know the majority of consumers, they will want something as soon as they possibly can. So just to set my impartiality stall out, I do accept both technologies are fantastic, but one is better suited than the other for the majority of existing homes in the UK, which are not of the greatest in terms of efficiency and being, they're leaky quite often. Apparently 80% of them were built before 1960. So that says it all. So please don't take me as biased or partial to one technology or the other. I just feel that the one has a better home than the other one does.
Thank you, Martyn. Hello, everybody. My name's Dom Goggins. I'm the Senior Advisor for PRASEG. Bim's just dropped off the call for a few minutes, so I'm just going to step in for him and hopefully we'll be able to get him back. Thank you to all the panellists for contributions to kick off this bit of the discussion. Martyn, you've covered actually quite a few things that have come up in the chat. So I'm going to switch to a question that's come in from Matthew Cullen and revert back to Fiona and to Chris before asking you for any further thoughts about analysis from Bloomberg suggesting that despite what we've heard, that hydrogen is only really economical in certain kind of niche industries, I would guess the hard to tackle industries, and not really for domestic heating. I mean, it seems that it's a point that still gets raised. Chris, can I come back to you first to address that question, and then Martyn and Fiona, if you have any additional thoughts, then we can come to you and then get into a wider discussion.
Of course, the analysis is fine but very limited, and I think what it illustrates is the lack of systemic thinking, and particularly the cost of production when meeting a demand. It's essentially saying all electricity produced is the same price no matter what time of day, no matter what demand on the system, and therefore you can do a very simplistic analysis that says if you create hydrogen from electricity, then you've got a transfer process, and therefore essentially it's cheaper. And it is in the instance, but it absolutely ignores the volume of production and the volume of demand and the systemic thinking across the piece. As the ENA, we did a report which KPMG did the analysis for us on the cost to the customer of hydrogen through to 2050, trying to demonstrate how that changes over time and takes those dynamics into consideration. And that report and that modelling indicates that we get parity from blue hydrogen and green hydrogen by the mid-2030s. And that's based on technological efficiencies and technological drives. I mentioned earlier that I used to run the electricity system, and I remember when offshore wind was £130 a megawatt. The government set what was deemed an ambitious target of £100 a megawatt for cost efficiencies and cost reduction. And currently offshore wind is being produced at around £39 a megawatt. We will drive efficiencies that drive down those costs in the supply chain. So, you know, my personal view is the analysis is fundamentally flawed when applying it to our energy system as opposed to individual molecules.
Thanks, Chris. Fiona, I'm looking forward to reading your research, and all of the data that I've seen shows that broadly the public will be supportive of the need to change, so long as that change is fair. How much was affordability a factor in the research that you did? And yeah, just be interested in your thoughts in the context of this question.
Yeah, we explored affordability in depth. It wasn't as big a topic as certainly I expected. People seem quite resigned to the idea, well, your gas bill always goes up, all bills always goes up. And we discussed very openly, or the experts and the public discussed very openly, all the unknowns and the fact that we don't know if this conversion does happen, how much hydrogen is going to be. It will be more expensive than natural gas, but actually the cost of the gas is a relatively small proportion of what people pay in their bill. So people accepted that their bills would go up. Not so much of an issue, although they recognise that some members of society, a small increase could be a major challenge. And it's not a case of, I don't know, for every pound you're spending now, you spend £1.10 on your gas bill. That could be a lot for some people. But for most of our participants, the bigger concern was the cost of replacing appliances, because that comes all in one go. And it's a greater amount, a greater hit at one particular point. Not with the nationwide research, but with the regional research, we did actually ask people, how much would you be prepared to pay? So for every pound that you pay for your current gas bill, how much would you be prepared to pay for a gas bill that is based on hydrogen? And the average response across all our respondents was £1.08. So a small increase, but Tim might be able to say more about this than I can, but that wasn't too far off the mark of what the projected costs might be at the moment. So again, it all supports the idea that people are accepting this change, and their concerns and their resistance are not as great as people initially expected.
Thank you, Fiona. And I think part of this, obviously, it links back to some of the issues that were raised before about the efficiency of our housing stock as well, which is a factor, and perhaps we'll hear more from the Chancellor on that in the budget next week. Tim, you were mentioned there as somebody who might have an opinion on this too, as a previous panellist. Can I bring you in and ask if that's the case?
Yeah, I'd just probably like to say a couple of things, thanks. The first is, you know, don't underestimate new technology and new developments as they go through over the years. We were looking at some presentations to us yesterday about potential new types of hydrogen production, membrane-free electrolysis, producing hydrogen from plasma. The cost that they're predicting the hydrogen to be made is very, very low and competitive with what it is in the electricity industry at the moment. New technology is moving at pace. If we stimulate the market, new products will come along, things that can be scaled up as well. So these things will start small as prototypes, but they will grow and be able to be scaled up. And when you talk to the people who are building up these new technologies, they're looking at how they can scale it up really easily. And so they're not just looking at doing it on a small scale. Following on from the comments that Fiona said, you know, my feedback that we've had from the social science research and for us dealing with customers direct is they are prepared to pay a small premium if they feel that contributing towards decarbonisation. It's not necessarily that hydrogen needs to come in and be cheaper than natural gas or cheaper than electricity. You know, if people want to feel good about what they're doing, they want to feel good about their contribution to society, and there's a limit to that, but they are actually prepared to pay a little bit more to feel like they're helping the world to be decarbonised. And so we need to also take that into account when we're thinking about the costs of conversion, and how we're going to do this. You know, there's probably going to be short-term increases in costs, especially capital cost of doing conversions. But as we go along and technology increases and things get scaled up, the price will tumble down, as Chris has said. And the projections that we've got at the moment are based on the things that we know in 2020. And as I've said, if you take a look into the future for new technologies, there are lots of new things that are coming along that are much more efficient as far as the transfer of electricity, for instance, on electrolysis. So it uses much less energy in at one side to produce hydrogen on the other side, and therefore the cost per kilogram of hydrogen starts tumbling down. So I'm very, very optimistic that there'll be new technology coming forward over the next few years that helps to make the cost of hydrogen production much lower than it's currently predicted to be.
Thanks, Tim. I'm keen that we deal with a question that's come in the chat to all panelists from John from the University of Sheffield. But before we do, Martyn, I said that I would direct the previous question to all of the three panelists from the second panel. So if you've got anything to add, then I'd welcome your thoughts. And then I think, Matt, I might ask you to have the first stab at answering John's question.
Yeah, my thoughts on are probably limited to the capital cost of the equipment, what the consumer faces. Presently, and there was some research commissioned by BEIS, undertaken by Delta, published in August, I think, of last year. And they were seeking the average costs of the installation of mainly these two technologies on the table. And a boiler replacement, and don't forget a hydrogen boiler is going to be more or less the same price as a natural gas boiler. So a boiler replacement, their research found that was roughly £2,500. And a heat pump replacement, again, one boiler out and a heat pump in, was £8,900. But if you had to do any work to the system, which is quite likely, that could rise up to around £14,000. And then if you had to do some work to the house, and questions have been asked in the virtual house of the Energy Minister, how much it costs to lift an EPC property in band E to a band of C, which is pretty well the minimum a heat pump can successfully work at. That costs around £12,000 as well to do that. So we're looking at, you know, could be £20,000 for a heat pump installation and £2,500 for a boiler installation. You can put the boiler installation on a credit card. You might need a second mortgage for the alternative. So I don't participate too much in the production side of things, but yeah, the sharp end when the consumer's got to pay, that's my sort of side of the story.
Thanks very much, Martyn. Just so you are all aware, Bim, as well as being the chair of PRASEG and a very busy member of Parliament, is also the Parliamentary Private Secretary to the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. So that's where he's had to drop off. He's just got to deal with a bit of an issue that's arisen fairly urgently. We've got a bit of time left. The discussion I think it will naturally come to a conclusion at some point. Hopefully we'll get Bim back before then, and when we do, we've got another round of questions and an opportunity for all panelists to have their say before we hear some concluding remarks from Matt from ENA. But Matt, I just wonder if you have any initial thoughts in response to John's question about hydrogen costs per tonne of CO2 emissions avoided, and then if any of the other panelists have got a perspective on that, we'd be welcome to hear it.
Sure, thanks, Dom. Yeah, and John's question, John says that arises from looking at some of the kind of alternative technologies out there for reducing CO2, including greenhouse gas removal from the air. I'm not going to comment on the technology side, they're from the perspective of direct air capture, because that's definitely outside of my my area of expertise. But I think the general principle that we need to look at the technologies to deliver net zero in the round, to have sort of reasonable basis of comparison in terms of delivery of a cost efficient approach to net zero is the right one. So we need to consider cost per tonne of CO2 emissions avoided. But I'd also link back to some of the remarks that Chris made earlier as well around considering this from an energy system perspective. So we need to think about not just the cost per tonne of a unit of hydrogen delivered, but also how we deliver secure hydrogen and electricity across the system and across the year and across multiple years, because we design our networks and our systems to meet peaks and to meet a kind of reasonable view of the biggest peak in energy demand that we're likely to see. And clearly that's crucial. Fiona referenced what consumers want to see in terms of reliability in the energy system earlier, and that's come out a couple of times in the discussion. So yes, we should be looking at that, but we should also be doing so in the context of the cost efficiency and the reliability of the system as a whole. And I think from the technology perspective, we also need to be thinking about the fact we've got 30 years here to reach net zero, or indeed less than 30 years to reach net zero. So we need to start deploying these technologies now, and I think that's kind of come out several times in the discussion in terms of hydrogen boilers, hydrogen ready boilers, and the action that's needed to scale up net zero hydrogen production in the near term and to move us in the right direction on this transition.
Thanks, Matt. Chris, you're unmuted. Is that an indication that you want to come in on this question?
Yeah, no, I'll just add to what Matt has said. If we continue to look at the cost of methane without the cost of carbon, then we will continue to have a very strong market for methane. 85% of homes are heated through natural gas, through methane. And at this stage of our journey, we shouldn't be negating any technology, and we should be encouraging technological developments. But the sheer scale and volume of that means that we will need all of these technologies in order to meet net zero. So it is just as important to continue with increased electrification, increased efficiency in that electrification, as well as the development of hydrogen and the hydrogen economy, as well as other solutions around CO2 and greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And we talk about net zero, we haven't even touched farming at this point. So this is a mammoth task. As Matt says, we don't have many years to achieve it, and we shouldn't be discounting technologies as part of that solution at this stage.
Looks to me like Dom may have frozen. You're back, Dom.
Yeah. Apologies. I think I froze them for a second. We've been having this issue the last couple of days. Angela, you're back, and I'm glad you're back. I would like to hijack my position as interim chair to ask a question that I'm going to start with. I'm going to throw over to you first, if that's okay. Because I just to strip this back to kind of the basic point, and I guess the role of an all-party parliamentary group, net zero it's both essential because of the advice from the Committee of Climate Change, but it's also something which, certainly my analysis, the Prime Minister has identified as a way to solve structural, political and economic challenges, which means that all of the issues that we're talking about today, they will exist in a political environment. The hydrogen strategy will be brought forward in a political environment, and the levelling up agenda, if you look, is a big part of that political context. Now, you're involved in work, kind of, you know, you mentioned it around the Manchester area, in kind of, you know, working out how this is going to work in the real economy and how it's actually going to serve communities and how the hydrogen economy is going to work. And while consumers and households have been a big part of today's discussion, jobs and skills haven't been as quite as prominent in the discussion. And I just wonder where you see this whole agenda around hydrogen and the publication of the hydrogen strategy kind of fitting into that levelling up agenda, and where the potential is for jobs and skills going forward.
Yeah, it's a good question. I apologise because my system's a bit slow, so please let me know if you can hear me. Yes, okay. So, I mean, if you just think about, we've got 30 years, right? We've got every single house in the country to upgrade, every single property. Every property that's on natural gas today is going to have to be on something else in the future. It needs to be more energy efficient. We need hundreds of homes to be retrofit every single day. Right? We are quite far away from making any of this happen. We need significant amount of skills, and we need a public who understands that it's necessary. And my fear actually today is that it's the public perception of net zero that we need to tackle to bring it onto the political agenda. The hydrogen strategy, I think it will be late spring that it will be on the cards, but it will, you know, my hope for it is it will not only be ambitious and set out the UK as a global leader in hydrogen, but it also shows us as an export of talent across the world. And so it's quite interesting. So I was talking to the Oil and Gas Technology Centre, and that, you know, they said to me, you know, if you go on an oil rig anywhere in the world, it's got a Scottish accent on it. You know, well, wouldn't it be great if there was an English accent or a Scottish accent or a Welsh accent on all the hydrogen projects all over the world, right? Because we've got the expertise to do that. But what that means, though, is that we've got to get going. And it does need investment. And somebody made a good point in the chat about who's going to pay for this. You know, there isn't any sustainability and carbon taxes on natural gas used in people's homes today. And we're going to have to get the investment from somewhere. And ultimately, people will have to pay for this. And that's the dilemma here, is that there's still a significant amount of fuel poverty. And doing anything to consumers' bills is definitely going to be challenging. So we've got to find other ways of doing this in a sort of an incremental way. And so my hope for the hydrogen strategy is we think about it in increments, in really sensible increments. So what are the things that we can do now at scale that get the hydrogen economy going? How do we then put the next sensible investment steps in to give people certainty so that they can do their engineering degree in hydrogen and they can start thinking about, you know, the careers of the future? So that there is a lot to think about. And so my sort of plea to the people listening in is that any opportunity you get to be involved in, pull and think about the net zero challenge, and especially the hydrogen strategy, is that you make it work for the UK, both from a net zero point of view, but from a economy perspective.
Thanks, Angie, and thanks for, I think I froze again, so getting the gist of the question and running with it, it's much appreciated. And just while we're on prospects for the hydrogen strategy, I just wonder if we can go around each of the panelists in turn and just get your kind of top line 1 or 2 thoughts for what you'd like to see in it. And I mean, assuming that it is brought forward this spring, as Bim said, I think it's hard to know in terms of the context of government publications when spring starts or when any particular season starts and ends, but let's hope it is in the spring. And I think starting with Tim, if I can, and then working through the panelists, I'll call you one at a time. I'd just be interested in your kind of top 1 or 2 thoughts for what you'd like to see in there.
Yeah, thanks. I think the main thing that I'd like to see in there is that they want to stimulate hydrogen trials and hydrogen pilots as per the 10-point plan, and that there's actually commitments to put investment into making that happen. If we do hydrogen trials and pilots, we will then be stimulating appliance manufacture, we'll also be stimulating production, and we will be looking at, on a small scale albeit, setting up the hydrogen supply chain as it's going to be in the future. So I think it's really, really important that we try and accelerate doing trials and pilots. It not only puts the research into play and demonstrates that we can operate networks safely, it allows the networks to also practice how we're going to do large-scale conversions and learn about how we're going to do things on a macro scale if we do sort of small villages and potentially then a town. I think the other thing really over and above that is, and I think it's been mentioned a few times, and Angie raised it at the start, is about production. You know, I think we're very close to proving the safety case for hydrogen. Martyn has alluded to the fact that the hydrogen boilers are there. I'd also like to add that the government-funded project Hy4Heat is developing a whole suite of appliances other than boilers. So there are fires, cookers, hobs and space heaters, all of which will be available to run on 100% hydrogen by the end of 2021. So it's not just boilers, we've got a whole suite of appliances that are ready. And what we need is the government to help us out. So for instance, new house builders aren't going to be able to put those appliances in their houses if they're not mandated by the government. They're building some houses along the end of the road, anecdotally to me, and there are letters in the paper about the fact that they're putting gas boilers into the houses and saying how awful it is that they're doing that, and that the government has said get rid of all natural gas boilers by 2025. What they haven't done is the other side of the equation is mandated that we can replace those with hydrogen-ready appliances. And so, you know, the themes that I'm sure you can see running through the discussion today are the things that we really want to see in the hydrogen strategy, because we're ready to take things forward. We want to really push the boundaries and see where we can take this and accelerate. And yeah, that's what I want to see in the strategy, is more ambition and more acceleration of the work that we've already done.
Thanks, Tim. Martyn, I'm gonna ask you to answer the same question, but also just mindful of a question that's come in. It's about the kind of the fact that at the minute all the houses that we've got to build because of building standards, or house building standards, will ultimately need to be retrofitted. So I'd ask our panelists just to take a quick look at the question that's been asked, and if you want to incorporate anything in response to that in your remarks, then it'd be appreciated. But Martyn, just on the basic question of what you'd like to see in the hydrogen strategy, over to you.
Yeah, I'd like to see some policy that hydrogen-ready boilers are the only boiler you can place onto the market from the mid-2020s. We may need a slightly longer period for commercial and industrial boilers. The volumes of those are quite a lot smaller. If we had firm policy decision, we could then invest in the production lines and things like that. Presently, the trials we're involved with, all of the boilers are more or less handmade. So consequently, they're expensive, as you can imagine. But when you're making them at volume in tens, hundreds of thousands, then the price will be, you know, comparable with a natural gas boiler. So I'd like to see that put in place. I'd also then, we could then start rather investing in training for installers. The training requirements for a hydrogen installer aren't going to be that onerous, but there's a lot of them. There is, you know, 130,000 gas safe registered installers. The amount that actually install boilers is probably half that, 65, 70,000, something like that. But that's still a lot of people to put through training centres and give them the necessary qualifications. And we haven't even generated, of course, the training syllabus and the qualifications they'd have to take. We have a temporary one in place for the trials, but we would need something a bit more solid and permanent as we move forward. And we see it really as quite a simplistic thing, perhaps an extra day, no more, when they undertake their normal renewals. currently it's a bit like if somebody installs natural gas appliances and LPG, they have to take another day to a half of a day of further training and certification. So if we had some concrete policy saying, right, from this is the date, only hydrogen ready boilers can be placed on the market, not dissimilar to what we did in 2005, when condensing boilers were mandated as the only boiler you could install. We had 2 or 3 years notice to get everything up and ready. So something like that is really what I would like to see.
Thanks very much, Martyn. Fiona, I mean, obviously interested in your thoughts individually, but also just from your research, what your assessment is of what the most important policy aspects are for the public and for the consumer. If you've got a couple of thoughts on that before we finish.
Yeah, a few thoughts. I suppose I would also personally like to see more action appear in the strategy, but certainly from the research evidence that we've got, more trials definitely to figure out what is the most time effective way of doing the conversions, because the public do support this, but they don't want a whole lot of disruption while it happens. And it's not so much loss of heat that matters, because a lot of this would be done over the summer period, but it's loss of hot water. So we need trials to identify how to do this conversion in a way that you're separating people from their hot water supply for the minimum amount of time. But I guess my big wish would be a strategy document or a version of it that is written for the public. So something that engages them, brings them in as a partner on this, and it helps them make an informed choice. So it tells them why this matters, what they need to know, and the choices they will be making. Just bring the public in on this.
Thanks, Fiona. It's an interesting one, that. I think one of the things that came through when the Energy White Paper was published was that it was written in a slightly different way to a traditional white paper, that it was a little bit more accessible, and that was a positive, but it perhaps was a result of some of the big decisions still not having been made and it promising to consult on the big decisions in future. So there's a balance there to strike, but it's interesting. Chris, I'm going to ask you to share any final thoughts you've got on the hydrogen strategy. And Angie, although you kind of kick this section off, if you've got one or two additional thoughts to share before we come to Matt to share his own thoughts, and then to offer a few concluding remarks, if that's okay. Over to you, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Dom. I'll keep this very brief. I'd like to see tacit support for industrial clusters and the roadmap for them. I'd like to see the support for blending. I see that very much as a no regret step in terms of implementation. But probably crucially, I want to see a very clear commercial and funding framework that allows industry to invest. And hydrogen ready boilers, again, I think that is an absolutely no regret step. I see it as very similar, as mentioned by Martyn, to the mandation of condensing boilers. And there was a big question at the time that condensing boilers were 1.5 times the cost of a conventional boiler back at the time that they were mandated. And the cost of condensing boilers came down quite dramatically once the decision had been made. I'd like to see support for local net zero plans so that we can have proper plans rather than the kind of aspirational plans that aren't very well rooted at the moment that we get. And over that, I'd like to see a delivery authority that was coordinating the actions and getting things started and getting things moving. Thank you.
Thanks. Sorry, Angie.
No, I was just going to go straight in there. So, Chris is right. It's a very sensible list, and I agree with all of those. I think making sure we've got investment in innovation. I'm not talking about tiny little projects. I'm talking about things that people can go and experience is really important, right? We need something to showcase. We need something to demonstrate how we do things. But we also need some stretching goals. So my fear for the strategy is that it's a bit short of ambition. And so just to give you an example, HyNet, the project in the northwest to bring hydrogen to that industrial cluster, can deliver 80% of Boris's 10-point plan when it comes to hydrogen on its own. So actually we could go a lot further and have bigger goals. The government in the 10-point plan suggested 2 hydrogen clusters, 2 industrial clusters would be supported by the mid-20s. Like, why not all of them? Like, we don't really have time to wait till 2030 to invest in industrial decarbonisation. It's really important. And I'm sure we could make investment go further to enable that to happen. And then the last thing that I'd like to see is that I just would like the strategy to be comprehensive in its thinking around all parts of hydrogen, all the bits that it can reach. So both heat, as we've talked about largely today, power generation, transport, industrial use, and most importantly, and Fiona and I are on the same page here, people, people's interaction with it. And to Chris's point, enabling that local planning to take place. So we bring them with us. That's what I'd need. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Andy. Before Matt, I hand over to you. Just so you know what happens now. I mean, there are some really clear calls and some interesting issues that have been raised today. PRASEG's parliamentary network is over 140 MPs and peers, and we'll get a full report of this meeting and the clear calls that are coming out of it to them. And we'll also make the recording available for people to watch back. So if attendees feel like they have colleagues that would benefit from seeing the discussion, then you'll be able to share it with them. In addition, I'll do a full analysis of the chat, and if there are issues that have arisen in the chat that we haven't quite covered, then I'll make sure that they are followed up in writing. So rest assured, if you feel like your issue hasn't been covered, it will be responded to. But I'll just, on behalf of PRASEG and on behalf of BIM, I want to thank you all for all panelists for taking the time to join us today, and all attendees for sparing the time to come and to participate in the discussion. I'll hand over to Matt now just to wrap up with some closing remarks and concluding thoughts, but I'll follow up with you all by email, and once again I just appreciate you taking the time today. Over to you, Matt.
Well, thanks very much, Dom, and thanks to you, Bim, and PRASEG for hosting us today. It's been a really good debate. So thank you also to all of the panelists for participating as well. I think, in conclusion, and drawing out a lot of what's just been said on the Ask for the Hydrogen strategy, you can see in everything that's been asked for, that there are real links to other areas of decarbonisation policy, and there's a real need, and Dom, you drew back to the Energy White Paper for the hydrogen strategy to consider those interactions. So particularly with the other strategy that we're expecting imminently on heat and buildings, which will talk a lot about not just the individual and the household in terms of heat decarbonisation, but also how we might see some of the trialling and piloting work around heat being taken forward, what role we can see for hydrogen-ready boilers. We need to see that integration between thinking around heat policy, thinking around hydrogen, as well as the other use sectors in industry and in transport. And I don't think we'd kind of underestimate the job there from a policy perspective to sort of bring coherence to all of those interlinked challenges. But that's really important if we're going to move forward with the kind of pace that we want to see on hydrogen. I think, kind of broadly and across everything we've heard, I draw out that it is closer than perhaps some people think, that we have the technology going into homes. We have the trials, H100 in Fife, that will deliver 100% hydrogen into homes in the next few years. The challenge, the opportunity is around how we stitch all of that together. So how we develop that production, how we develop the the facilities to use hydrogen in homes, in transport, and in the industrial clusters. All of those opportunities are really exciting, but the hard bit is linking them together. And to Bim's point, the networks are very happy to be the boring link in the middle as we deliver that transition, and we make sure that hydrogen is a really important part of the net zero energy system. So I will leave it with that remark. But thank you again, Dom, PRASEG, Bim, and to all the panelists for joining us today.
Thanks very much, Matt. Like I said, I'll follow up with an email to everybody that's attended. Appreciate the time. Just one more thing, we're starting an exclusive series of briefings with Lord Deben next week. They're going to be kind of regular progress reports in terms of government's progress towards delivering net zero against the committee's advice. I encourage you all to sign up for those briefings. They'll be happening fairly regularly between now and COP26. Hydrogen is going to be a big part of it because Lord Deben really does like talking about hydrogen. So hopefully I'll see you all on that call next week. But for now, thanks again, everybody, and we will see you soon.